Welcome to Pilgrims Past Podcast, everyone. Just have a snack and let's ponder whether or not existence has any meaning in Evangelion. Why don't you guys get started first, and we can all talk about. We're going to discuss mostly the ending of Evangelion, but we can go all over the place. Really, we just start with the ending as a course, and we'll discuss our own impressions of it and whether or not it's nihilistic, or it's meaningful, or if it's smart or stupid or whatever. All right. So, anyone has anything to get started? Anything to say first?
Well, it's certainly one of the things you said.
Which one?
Ultimately, not the most meaningful. I think it has a lot of lead up to be meaningful, but I think it fails on its promise.
At which point? Like the last couple episodes, or a little before that?
Mm-hmm. Starting with the last couple of episodes as things begin to get trippy and disjointed.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Well, first and foremost, I will say, credit where due, it is beautifully animated, and I'd say there's honestly an argument for it being one of the best pieces of animation of the decade.
Mm-hmm.
I think I mentioned this to you before the other day, Pilgrim. I have watched Evangelion a total of 3.2 times, and each time my opinion has changed of it. I say 3.2 because the first time I watched it, I could only get about 5 episodes in before despising the cast, and I stopped.
Right.
No, since then, I've sort of come from watching it all the way through and hating it to thinking it's the best thing since sliced bread, and now I'm at a point where, okay, it's not as good as people say it is, but there is something to take away from it in there.
And it happens when you're in different stages of life, I guess. So like when you're young, you're like, this is stupid. There's like, where's all the fighting? And then you're like, hey, this is really deep because I'm all grown up and intellectual. And then it's like, well, I guess that's
I think
the
you're
way.
just trying to rag on me for being in my 30s now.
Well, as you say, I'm getting there. I'm a year off. What about you?
You said it, not him.
Right. What about you, Kitasek? What's your impression of the ending?
It's not always like the original ending before the release of the end of the Evangelion. I don't know why. I think that the realization that the final message of Evangelion is like take care of yourself, literally. And that's something that Shinji had to realize from the beginning and maybe try asking for help instead of distancing himself from everybody since the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To me, I think when I experienced the ending quite recently, actually, I actually had a different impression than I've seen anyone else online or on YouTube express. So for me, I really don't include the anime ending, right? That artsy college psych film that we have at the end, right? Because he ran out of money. Like there's a whole debate on why he ended up ending it like that in the anime. But to me, I think he just ran out of money, so he just made like a college film, and then with the characters and stuff like that. And then the real ending to me is end of Evangelion, the movie. Like there's no doubt, like that's the end of the narrative and everything. That to me is what I say when I mean the ending. And to me, I actually thought that it was fantastic. I thought that the ending is a Greek tragedy, which is why you have the whole Oedipus complex thing throughout the whole thing. Like it's a Greek tragedy, right? Like Ray is his mother, right? Or a clone of his mother, stuff like that. It's all an Oedipus reference. And when you have the ending where all of humanity dies because of the failures of this main character, he can't bring himself to become the hero. And his failure dooms humanity. That's tragic, but it doesn't have to be nihilistic. You know what I mean?
I think one of the things that I took away from watching End of Evangelion the other day, just to sort of prepare for this, I found there was something of an amusing irony in the fact that the Human Instrumentality Project is this supposed to be sort of this idea of the technological singularity, and it's just so hilarious the fact that it's entirely a religious event.
Yeah, it's supernatural. I mean, you have like in the lore, you have an alien reference or whatever, but in the show, without that, it seems more supernatural, right? Yeah, there's no computer being jacked up into everybody's brains.
It's a ritualistic action. Has anyone ever watched the Fulton Sheen videos?
Oh, yes.
So Fulton Sheen does this brilliant video on the true meaning of Christmas. I know that's very sort of like suspiciously titled, but it's actually about this idea of how beings can never by their own will become more than their immediate nature, and it requires a higher being to bring them up, which is entirely why Christ comes to earth as the Word made flesh. And I found it interesting that the Human Instrumentality Project is brought about very much by the same means.
Yeah. But the human instrument, like, let's talk about theology then in the show. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, there is none.
Actually, there is, like, okay, so Hideki Anno, who made the show, as everyone was saying in the comments when I released the video announcing that I was going to watch this thing, apparently he said on record that it's purely for aesthetic reasons, for, it's symbolic.
Exactly.
But however, that doesn't mean that it's superficial for two reasons, right? Like, go to a woman, like a random woman, and say, excuse me, ma'am, but you're sexually attractive. Or say to her, excuse me, ma'am, you're beautiful. You're going to get two different reactions, right? And you used this, you're saying the same thing, but you used, the way you said it, you used two different symbols, you used two different means of communication. So that does affect the way that the message comes across. So using Christian symbols, even if it's for aesthetic reasons, that does affect how his message comes across. And in my opinion, since he was very much doing the show he was doing a psychoanalysis, right? A psychological analysis of the human condition. But he was using Christian symbols for that, the same way that Jung and Freud used Greek mythology. And I think it does alter the plot, it alters character motivation, and it does impact what he's trying to say when he uses Christian symbols. It's not just purely superficial, in my opinion.
Well, it's just mostly superficial, in my view, because he uses a lot of these symbols and themes incorrectly.
Well, I'd say that I agree with Pilgrim, actually. The symbols themselves, whilst they may have intended to be used superficially, the symbols in and of themselves, I would say, have a greater power than the ideas of a single man.
I think he actually admitted. I'm sorry.
Sorry, in a way, I'd say that the symbols in and of themselves are real, and they evoke something that even if you don't intend them to evoke that meaning, they do regardless.
Yeah, I agree. And Kudi, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I think he actually admitted to using Christian symbols as a way of standing out among other anime.
Yeah.
So it very much is superficial, but I think it works out in a way.
Yeah, it does, because I can't see how it's superficial if it's directly involved with character motivations and the climax of the whole story. Because, like, if you were going to just imagine Evangelion without Adam, without Lilith, without the notion of the hearts. Because to me, he at least, even if it's superficial, he did do his homework, because the way that the angels are formed, right? Each angel is of its own species. They are different from each other. The angels are not one alien species. Each angel is from one species, right? And they're different from each other. And humanity as a whole, if they were formed together, they would all make one angel, right? This is directly out of Thomas Aquinas, because each angel is explicitly his own species in St. Thomas Aquinas. And a way that he uses to explain that would be if all of mankind were one universal man, right, or woman, right, that would be like an angel, right? And you see that explicitly in the show of Evangelion itself. Also, the references of hearts. My heart, it reflects your heart. My heart is in your heart, etc. That reminds me of, like, prayer. Like, when certain prayers where we ask for the Virgin Mary, like, your heart is in perfect union with the heart of Christ, of Sacred Heart of Christ, etc. They use similar language in the whole thing, and so it does at least reflect a deeper understanding of theology, even if it's used aesthetically. He did do his homework even a little bit more than, like, he expresses more theology than a lot of Western artists even know about, like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
Like, compared to the theology in Game of Thrones, like he tries to do that a little bit with, like, the seven who are one. It's even more superficial than Evangelion.
I couldn't comment. I've never seen Game of Thrones. I'm honestly quite a boring person. I don't watch these popular things.
Insert British superiority joke.
I said no such thing. Thank you very much.
A British man, a Brazilian, an American, and a girl from the Czech Republic walk into a bar, and the bartender says, "We get the heck out of here." All right. So, anyone else have anything more to comment?
Please go ahead.
After you've Lars.
I didn't have really anything. Go ahead.
No, I thought it was interesting that we've decided to deride episodes 25 and 26 in the face of Evangelion. But I don't think that they are entirely without merit, even though they are quite ridiculous compared to the rest of the show.
Right.
So I kind of got this very sort of like this kind of Nietzschean feel to it, because I don't know if anyone else took this away from watching it, but when I was watching the last episode, there's that scene where the instrumentality project seems to break and start shattering around Shinji as he has this sudden realization that he's sort of having this moment of realizing what he himself is, that he has flaws and that they're not some reason for him to not exist. It felt to me quite Nietzschean, is in the sort of the end of Evangelion implies that human instrumentality doesn't work and it's rejected. And it's almost as if that idea of embracing the self is that means by which it was rejected, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, it has a happy ending, right? Yeah, I do agree that they have merit, but like I said, he ran out of money, so at least in my opinion, and because there's a lot of theories on what happened.
There is no shame in running out of money. We've all been there.
Yeah, exactly. Especially me right now. But I do think that he decided to focus on what mattered to him, which was the character journeys and like the character studies, and he just focused on that. And literally using like little hand drawings and stuff like that, and footage from the real world and stuff and pictures. But
the point of the series all in, it was meant to be a sort of a character case study, as opposed to sort of an ongoing narrative and world building exercise, which people seem to want it to be, and it never is. Which is got those very odd rebuild films.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a reason why it ended up not working out as a story. He had to finish it in the end of Evangelion with the movie, because it'd be the equivalent of, you know, me doing a video essay and then ending with slam poetry or like doing a rap battle or stuff like that, right? It's like what, like, but it does interrupt the story completely, and it doesn't end the story, but it does end the character journeys in a way. But I do think that I do think that if he didn't run out of money, I think the ending of Evangelion would not have been tragic. I think it would have been a happy ending, and I think it probably would have. This is just me talking out of my ass here, but I do think that he would have ended the narrative as a whole if he had enough funding or enough time, and without the horrible experience of fans giving him death mail, he wouldn't have, I don't know, felt he wouldn't have been even more, you know, depressed and then made a tragic ending. But I think the tragic ending of End of Evangelion is itself meaningful.
You mentioned that actually, because I don't know if you've read the manga at all, but the ending to the manga is actually pretty happy.
Really?
Yeah. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who feels so inclined to go and read it, but it is quite a happy ending.
Is that the original one? That comes up before everything, right?
So the manga came along, if I remember it correctly, like somebody in the comments is going to rip me apart for saying this, but I think it came out sort of alongside the anime to sort of build up interest, and it just kept going. So very more or less the same narrative throughout, but no, there was a happy ending in the manga. That was quite nice.
All right, okay. And Hideki Anno, he wrote it?
Oh goodness me, I'm going to have to resort to my archives, by which I mean Google.
Mr. Google. All right, but yeah, okay. I think that's interesting. I think that kind of makes my point that there was a happy ending there somewhere, but ended up not getting expressed. I really did like the tragic ending at the end of Evangelion, though, as I'll explain later. But anyone else have anything to add about the episode 25 and 26?
Not that in particular, no.
it left me really pissed when I first saw it. I'm like, what?
Oh yeah,
Like, what,
me too. Extremely.
what's this artsy college bullshit going on? But the ending,
Like,
though,
what does this even mean? Is this really supposed to say anything? It's just trying to say something, but it accomplishes in saying nothing.
within the context of the greater story? Yeah, I think if you took it as like an added bonus kind of thing with like the character journeys as a form of character study, I think that would be fine. But that's not how you. I mean, if it just ended there, I think I would have hated the show. To be honest, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it interrupts the story. I know a lot of people love it, and I like it as well, but not how you end it, not how you end in like a massive show. Like I've been on this journey with
All I
these
can
characters.
imagine now is Pilgrim is just going to start sending Hideaki Anno death threats like 10 years too late.
Yeah, where's my ending? Right? Yeah. But what do you guys think about the end of Evangelion, the movie, of like all of humanity dying and Shinji just being Satan?
Just more of the same, honestly. But I think Shinji being Satan, that's actually an interesting point because Shinji, like the devil himself, failed to live up to his promise.
Yeah.
I haven't read Dostoevsky's The Underground Man, but I believe that Shinji is a good representation of the Underground Man archetype.
So this is new to me. I've never heard this before. Like Shinji as Satan.
Well, I mean, maybe it's the dubbing, because in the dubbing, like, if I remember correctly, they go like, okay, when Shinji merges with the thing, or when he's inside, like in the dubbing, they go like, oh, okay, depending on what he decides, Shinji could be like a god who like helps everything, or he could be like the devil that ruins everything, right? And they use the term devil. So that was in the dubbing. So I don't know if that was like a error in translation or something like that, but that's what I got from it, which reminds me of Attack on Titan, which is a similar thing, right? Where Eren becomes like the devil of old Earth and stuff like that, right? The devil of all Earth, where the main character becomes like the ruin of every other character around through his bad choices, because he never grows as a character. Which brings us back to the. I mean, we have to talk about this eventually, right? The master of Baiters scene, right? The bait master scene.
Yes, of course.
Yes. I've read a number of explanations for that scene, and every time I read one, I think to myself, there are many, many ways in which this same sort of feeling or symbolism could have been evoked without that. This is just intellectual cope.
Yes.
You say, but before we get into that, let's see Cutie's. Do you have anything to say about that scene, Cutie?
I think people often like forget that these kids are 14. They are 14 and they're heavily traumatized, and somehow people expect them to act normal, and then they are judged like very harshly for the actions they do and take. And I think that we are looking for something that's way too deep for the original message. Like, I don't think that this scene is like some heavy symbolism of anything, or it's just a 14-year-old kid being 14.
You know what I think it means? I think if you want to masturbate, you're going to ruin the world. Like, it's your fault. The whole world's going to die because you're masturbating.
You were right. There is the theology of Evangelion.
but I don't say that ironically, though, because our friend John from that we know, like, he said that he didn't really like that scene because it seemed like a reversal of character growth. Because right in the ending, like, you have this really disturbing character moment. But that's the point. Like, there is no character growth. To the contrary, like, there's a character regress as all the pressure, as he reacts poorly to everything around him and does the wrong decisions, and his personality and his character becomes even worse as time goes on due to his choices. And that, I think, symbolizes that. And I do think that I like that scene, actually. I'm not going to be like all edgy. Like,
you like it, huh?
I like the scene. Like that. Yeah, see, everyone's going to judge me, especially out in the comments. But the reason why I like it is because the tragedy of Shinji is the tragedy of the man who doesn't live up to it. Because masculinity is very important throughout the show, especially like Asuka, for instance. She's always talking about masculinity, and she's always belittling Shinji for not living out his promise as a man, right? And I think that's exactly the thing. Like Shinji, Evangelion is so great for our time because I think it is showing the tragedy of being like, okay, I'm going to say it. It's a cringy term, but being a beta male, basically, like oh, you're a beta male. Okay, you weren't strong enough to defend your community. Now everyone's going to die, basically, and that's the tragedy of the weekly.
And I have to add too that there are times when everybody is Shinji. Everybody has been this dismal, utter failure that could have stepped up to fulfill his potential, but did not because of their own emotional turmoil.
Exactly.
Right. I
and
can
pride.
only assume at this point, I don't want to name names, but at least one of you has been banned from your local hospital.
Well, I'm not going to say anything to that. And no, I've never been banned from my local hospital. But,
Just making sure.
But remember in high school, like there's always some kid caught doing that in the high school toilets. Like not me, I'm not saying, but like this is typical behavior. Like
It's a step up from hospital, so like no shame.
Yeah, but yeah, that's the thing about Shinji. Like tragedy in itself, right? The Greek tragedy, it can be extremely cathartic, which I think that's where the term catharsis comes from, right? I think it's Aristotle. He was explaining the point of tragedy. I think I could be wrong. I studied this in college a long time ago, but the catharsis is really when a work of fiction makes you realize something, and tragedy is, I think, the quintessential work that brings out a catharsis in people, because it shows you what can happen if you don't make the right decisions. So tragedy is not nihilistic, because nihilism says that there's no meaning to anything. It doesn't even have to be sad. Like Waiting for Godot, which in my opinion is a nihilistic work, it doesn't even have a sad ending. It just doesn't really have an ending. It just goes on and then whippers and then dies as a work. But the narrative, I mean. But with Evangelion, there is a possibility for a great moment. There is a possibility for this mystical experience that people can have without turning into like space seamen, right? And he could bring that about. He could bring a better world when he merges with the divine and stuff like that. But he doesn't. And that hope for a possible future, that is itself a meaning, because it shows us that we have the power to make something good, and if we fail, we'll end up like Shinji, where we're strangling we're strangling our love interest in the middle of a beach next to like the dead liquid bodies of everyone we knew, right? Like if we fail, we can bring about hell in our own world. That's why we shouldn't fail. And Shinji shows us how we can fail. If we get too caught up in our own problems, if we get too vengeful because of our own problems, if we don't try to, I don't even know. I still have to think more about it. But what do you guys think? I mean, I don't want to ramble on too long.
So I feel that's a bit unfair to Shinji, in a way, simply because it kind of presumes the fact that Shinji and Asuka are the only people who survive this human instrumentality project, this becoming of the sort of the greater being, as it were. Whereas if two of them come back, it follows that surely eventually more will. Sure, that the world is a very sort of interesting place post Third Impact, and it's going to take a lot to rebuild, but not all is lost. I think we just lost Cutisec. Oh, she has internet problems apparently.
Oh, that makes sense. We're gonna have to try to encourage her to talk more afterwards, because otherwise, I think she has a lot to say. All right. What do you think, Valerius?
Yeah, I can see Asuka being the new Eve to Shinji being the new Adam. It's kind of a wiping the slate clean for both of them. A confession, an absolution, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Oh, she's back. Fantastic. What do you think about Shinji's failure in the end of Evangelion, Cutisec?
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, we can.
This question.
kind of breaking up on my end.
Yeah, I think it's internet problems. All right, we'll keep talking, but if you're able to get into, don't worry about interrupting us because we want to hear from you, Cutie. Give it a sec.
Yeah, I'm trying to work it out somehow.
It's all right. I think we can hear you now. So, what do you think about the ending?
Which ending?
In End of Evangelion, yeah. With, do you think Shinji failed? Do you think there's still hope? Do you think it was a total failure, or do you think there's still hope to rebuild, or he just sets, or there's like a time loop thing going on? How do you interpret that ending?
I'm thinking that more importantly, the end of Evangelion sets the grounds for the rebuild movies that came later on, and I think that the end of Evangelion actually makes me hate Shinji much more because he basically killed everyone. Rei is dead. We can assume she is dead. Then he starts choking Asuka, and I think that the original ending was maybe painted Shinji in the lighter light, in like something that he realized something. But in the end of Evangelion, I think we are back at the start, and the Shinji is still dealing with the same things all over and over again.
So you think he created a time loop where he makes the world go back to like the primordial soup, and then evolution goes all the way back, and then you have like this. That's one of the theories, right?
Yeah, it is. It's like it's. I think it's like the setting ground for the rebuild movies, because if you decide to watch the rebuild in the future, you will understand these like connections. Maybe we could say it makes sense later on.
That the rebuild happens after the original series and the end of Evangelion, because it's in a time loop and we see everything going on again, but a little differently this time around. Is that it?
Yeah, and the latest movie that came out last year, you actually see. Actually, one of the fears is that that Shinji manages to break the loop, and finally he matures. It's
Okay.
like a spoiler. I'm sorry, but
No, don't worry about it. I don't mind spoilers. What about you guys?
So now that Cutisek has just mentioned Rei, as a little bit of a tangent, I found watching Rei to be just existentially terrifying.
Because she's like a robot. Because she doesn't express herself.
She not only is she a clone, she is fully aware that she is a clone, which to me is just a very sort of uncomfortable thought.
I think that Rei herself battles with the idea of being a clone. We can see that she tries to reject individuality in the beginning, and as we get closer to the end of the show, we can see that she tries to accept, like, maybe trying to be more of a human than a clone.
Yeah, I'd say that's true, actually.
But that's when she kills everybody, right? Because if she continued, this is the tragedy of Rei, right? If she had continued to be like a doll, as they say in the show, she would have done what? What's the name of the father's name? Gano. I want to say gonorrhea as a joke, but Ganondo. I forgot his name. So Gendo. Right. So Gendo, he wants to like bring humanity to a higher place of consciousness without killing everybody into, space orange juice, right? That's what I got. That's why he rebels against Silly at the end there.
So the main thing for Gendo is the fact he just wants to be reunited with his wife, which in and of itself is quite tragic in the fact that you will sacrifice everything else for the sake of that, really. I don't know. I think there's something you can sympathize with about that mindset, really, whether regardless of whether it's right or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think that every character basically has a personal tragedy that sets the course for them for the rest of the show.
Yeah. And everyone is tragic because nobody really does the right thing. And I think when they come to their endings, they realize that they didn't do the right thing. Right. That's the tragedy. That's why it's not nihilistic, because there was a right choice, and people could have had a happy ending if they, got out of themselves, if they got out of their own personal obsessions, if they got out of their own issues. But I think it's not just as simple, right? Oh, just be better, and then you'll avoid tragedy. I don't think it's exactly like that. It's more than just that.
And the tragic element of that is the fact that, yes, everyone had the potential to be better and sort of break these negative behavioral loops they had, but did any of them have any real good examples of that from previous generations? Sort of, no sort of general blame laid to any of the characters. It's just that so many of them lacked that sort of very solid like role model figure in their lives, which had a real knock-on effect with their own behaviors, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's one of the things we can see in Shinji and Gendo, because I think we can say probably that Gendo was running from the idea of accepting his wife's death, as well as we can see Shinji running away from everything later on.
Yeah. And as a result, Shinji didn't have a good role model. Because Gendo, if he just sorted his own issues out, he could have focused on, being a good role model for his son, and then maybe the apocalypse wouldn't have happened, right? And I do think let's talk about Kaji, because if anyone could have been a good role model, I think Kaji could have been a good, and he was a little bit of a good role model to Shinji. And I think it is kind of tragic that Misato, as fun as she is, I love her character. I mean, I make jokes that she's like a nonce, right, like all the time. But I mean, her own dialogue doesn't help. But
Yeah.
it's kind of a tragedy that she was mostly Shinji's role model, and while Kaji was mostly Asuka's guardian, right? I think it should have been reversed. I think that would have been, because then Shinji could have had like an example of what it was, even though Kaji wasn't a perfect man. Of all the characters there, I think he was the most like together. I think, right? He was the most
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a bit reversed like this. I think it would be too late for Shinji to accept like a male role model into his life.
I don't think that's necessarily true.
Hmm?
No. I think sort of if you sort of around that age, at the age of 14, where you're very, very impressionable, having a positive male role model can sort of take you leaps and bounds, really.
At the same time, at 14, you start like being very rebellious and to start rejecting authorities. I don't know.
That's true, but I think, in Shinji's case, though, I think his whole issue is that he wasn't rebellious, right? He coped in life by just doing what everyone told him. So I think in that, for him specifically, if he had a good role model like Kaji, I think the world could have been saved. And I think proof of that is in the story itself, in the original series, which is what I saw. There's that moment where he doesn't want to pilot Neva. He doesn't want to pilot Neva ever again, right? And then you have this angel who destroyed Rei and destroyed Asuka, and it's going to destroy HQ, and it's going to merge with Lilith in the basement and destroy all mankind, right? But then that moment he meets Kaji, and Kaji inspires him to do the right thing, to go out of himself, to go out of his own issues, and to go out and face the darkness, right? And that saves the world in that moment, even if it's just for a little while longer. So I think him losing Kaji in his life really is kind of what destroyed the world, basically. I think he didn't have that constant.
It's interesting that Shinji moves out of this paradigm of heroism. Like, he moves in and out of it so constantly throughout the series. Like the first instant you meet him, where he first gets into an Eva to fight an angel, he really doesn't want to do it, and then he decides to take on that notion of self-sacrifice for the sake of Rei, who is in an obviously very bad condition and is expected to sort of fulfill this duty if Shinji doesn't do it. And then for the next 4 or 5, possibly longer than that, episodes where he pilots an Eva, he starts doing it just because he is told to. And then near the very end, as you say, in this moment with Kaji, he gets back into an Eva after saying he won't do it again, because it is that notion of self-sacrifice, and it is the right thing to do. I just think it's very interesting how he walks a fine line between heroism and just plain obedience, really.
I do want to talk a little bit about his willingness to go into the Eva when he sees Rei so badly injured and maybe having to go in there again. I think that tugs on a primal heartstring that's in the male psyche of needing to protect the female and preserve it from all harm.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the foundation of chivalry, really.
Yeah. Or maybe he's like a white knight beta male, right? I'm sorry, I had to make that. It's like, this is simping for Rei. No, I'm kidding. I think absolutely right.
Let's be real. I mean, if it was Asuka in the same position, he probably would have just said, "Begone, thought."
Yeah, honestly.
Maybe. I mean, kind of, yeah. I mean, that's what he did at the end, right? At the end of Evangelion, it's a major begun thought when he chokes her on the beach. That's horrible. So the dogs are barking. They're really going crazy. Are they bothering you guys? The
Oh,
barking?
no. I like dogs.
Slightly obtrusive, but not ruining everything.
Dogs are never obtrusive. Don't be silly.
All right. Yeah, I think Shinji being so obedient, I think it's perfect because that's how you have a character who's extremely powerful, but while being like a weakling at the same time. His power is not his. The power comes from the institution, the Eva, everything. It's an institution that's using him as a vessel of power, but he has no control. That's how you can have like an overpowered character that can destroy alien angels, right? While at the same time being a complete weakling. By making him completely obedient and not standing up for himself when it comes to him just being a puppet, to like a.
I think that point is driven home symbolically when he decides at sort of about I can't remember which episode it is, but it's just after he fights the fourth Eva, which has been sort of possessed by an angel, and he decides sort of the next episode that he is going to rebel against the institution that gives him this power. And in that first moment, we see just how powerless he really is, despite having this immensely powerful tool at his disposal. Which I think actually he was incredibly justified in that moment of rebellion, because honestly, despite the fact that his presence there is obviously very necessary, he is asked to do some absolutely abhorrent things throughout the course of the series.
Things that aren't even necessary, right? Gendo just being a dick. That's the impression I got.
Even the necessary ones aren't nice, but sort of like, I mean, well, then it becomes a question of whether sort of like the immoral order is it moral to follow the immoral order or not, which generally most Christian theology would say no. But yeah, just generally sort of, I mean,
he was just following orders.
When we sort of make this comparison, sorry, what were you saying?
I'm making a Nazi joke. Yeah, he was just following an order. He was just following orders, right?
You said it. I was thinking about this the other day, in the fact that sort of like earlier in the podcast, we made this comparison between Shinji and sort of like most people we come across in the 21st century in this way. He's very sort of evocative of that idea. But at the same time, I think there is something quite admirable about the fact that Shinji did something that the vast majority of people wouldn't do. That first time he has to get in the Eva, and he does it.
Right.
And even then, sort of, I realized that it's this very necessary thing within the context of the series and what's going on in the sort of the events of the world in which Shinji finds himself. It's just one of those things, though, that is just, when you think about it for a second, it's absolutely abhorrent to ask a 14-year-old to do.
Yeah, it's child soldiers, right? And Cutie said you're going to say something?
No.
Sorry,
yep. She cut out.
I think it's connection issues. Yeah, the internet.
We take this opportunity to jump in and talk about the kid who was supposed to pilot the fourth Eva. What was his name again?
Suzu.
Yes. I found him to be a very masculine character, one of those kind of friends that can really sharpen a wimpy kid like Shinji to be really manly, in addition to the mentor of Kaji.
Well, we did all agree the other day that Shinji just needed his ass beat, and that is exactly what
Yeah,
it is. But what's curious to me is how this masculine kid gets in his Eva and is immediately possessed, and he's completely out of action for the rest of the series. I feel like that's kind of, in a way, representative of how masculine kids get hamstrung and, sabotaged from being themselves in today's world.
Especially in a school setting, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Sit quietly and raise your hands. All that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's talk about a good example of femininity, I think. I think the perfect example is probably his mother, right? I think she's a good example of Shinji's mother. I think is a good example. She's a good example of a woman trying to do what's best for the world, I think. but I'm not entirely sure of. A lot of the plot elements are confusing to me. Cutis, like you know more about the story. You've seen it more than anyone, right? So what happens with his mother exactly? She gets in the robot. Is it her choice, or what happens? I'm still not sure about that.
I think this part is kind of ambiguous, I could say, because she gets absorbed by the Eva Unit 1 somehow. Thus there's no body when there's the scene where Shinji is with his father at the graveyard. They kind of reconnect for the first time in a few years, and he mentions that. And there's the theory that Yui's like endgame was actually for the whole story of Evangelion to happen. Like that her goal was actually the human instrumentality project. But I think it's just a theory, not really confirmed in the story. And I wouldn't say she's like the perfect example of femininity.
Femininity.
Thank you. Like there's not a great example of like perfect masculine character, and there's no example of the perfect female character either.
Yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
Because even
Everybody's flawed in some way.
Yeah, and everyone is destroyed by their flaws. I think because everyone is flawed. You don't have to have a perfect character who has no flaws to have him be a good example, or her a good example of femininity or masculinity. You just have to have them overcome their flaws as the story goes on. But I think every single character is destroyed by their flaws. I think, including Kaji at the end of the day. So I agree with you. I think you're right. But I don't think her goal was human instrumentality. I think, from what I remember in the dialogue and end of Evangelion, that Gendo was. I think, they had a goal of making humanity reach like this mystical experience kind of thing, but not have everyone turn into liquid. I think like it was supposed to. I could be wrong, but I think Gendo and his wife's goal was to make humanity's consciousness expand. And we can connect with each other on a conscious basis, and we can be able to connect with each other spiritually, but we still have our physical forms. I think that was their goal, but I could be wrong. I don't know. It's a confusing series.
I wanted to make a human hive mind kind of like ants or the Tyranids from Warhammer 40k.
Oh yeah, well when you put it like that.
The original goal was actually like to rid humans of like anxiety and sadness, like the parts that we are missing, and like, make everybody compatible with everyone. So we would like
we will connect with everyone, right? And then pieces that are missing in us will be complemented by other people, which I think. You see, this is the thing. This is a theology which Hideki Anno uses as well. Like the Human Instrumentality Project is all about like it's a very warped and corrupted understanding of what Jesus says, right, in the Gospels of Father, make everyone one as you and I are one, right? Like I guess liquefying everybody and putting everyone in a blender is one way to do it, but I don't think that's exactly what Christ had in mind, right? When he's
trying, I mean,
yeah, but yeah, that's the thing. Like human instrumentality is not just like singularity. Like you said, it's more supernatural in origin, and I think that's also like a theological. They're like this Gnostic cult, right, where they don't like the body, because in Christian theology, the body is important. So maintaining the integrity of the body as something that was made by God is important. So if you destroy the body, that's an affront, right, to who created the body, right? And I think in the show that I think the show is kind of saying that the Human Instrumentality Project is kind of sick in a way, because we can only interact with each other if we exist as individuals. And I think that's the realization. See, Shinji comes to that realization when he rejects human instrumentality for himself. So he liquefies everyone, but that's what I understood. Like he kills everybody by turning everyone into orange liquid. But then when it's his time,
I'm not entirely sure that it is his choice to do so at first. I mean, he is the catalyst for it to occur, but I don't know if it was his choice to do so. Maybe it could have been, but at the very least, he does renege on that, and that human instrumentality is rejected when you realize that those boundaries between individuals and everything that is there is just as important as that completion of the soul, as it were.
That our identity is important. We can't like if people are dissolved, they're dead, right? If they're all merged into one, there is no interaction. There is no existence, because existence is to act, right? And for action to occur, you have to have an actor and you have to have an object that's acted upon. So we can only really exist if we're objects that are separate from each other and we interact with each other and upon each other, right? Because if we're all one thing, we don't really exist, right? We're all just one blob. It's like might as well be one big black screen throughout the whole universe, right? That's not existence, right? If everything is merged into one, just one big black thing, right? One big blob gray thing, right? But to existence to happen, you have to have objects acting upon each other. And I think that can be messy, that can be painful, but that can also be very good. You can only experience good if you exist. And you can experience bad things as well, but non-existence is itself bad because you can only have good if you exist, right? And evil, bad is just the absence of good. So I think that's the whole free will argument that I think is in the show. You have to be brave enough to risk suffering in order to experience true moments of bliss and true good moments with other people. Yeah, it hurts to be with other people, but it can also be very good. Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
I've always found this interesting, sort of that concept in the argument for free will, and the fact that it to sort of like, there's always people who will say that free will doesn't make sense for the fact for us, if we could have been made purely good, then it would have been more of a moral good for us to be made purely good as opposed to having free will. Whereas I would say that our creation having free will is an inherent good, because something becomes good by the fact that you have, by comparison, the opposite, which is evil. And you have that free choice to distinguish or act in one way or the other. And choosing the good is more of an inherent good than having no other choice but to act in such a way, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. That you can only choose good, right? Good only exists if it's a moral choice, right? If you, let me see if I can put this in a better way. Love and goodness has to be voluntary, right?
Indeed,
a rock isn't moral, right? A rock isn't good. It's just there, right? It can be used for good things, but good is connected to intention, right? And intention is connected to autonomy. I could be talking I could be talking out of my ass, but I think that's the argument for morality, though, right? If we're just, for instance, like Sam Harris famously says, if we're just the result of chemical reactions in our brains, right? We're not moral agents. We're forces of nature. The same way that a wave, right, crashes on the shore, I can then, I don't know, beat the crap out of an old lady, and that would be the manifestation of my brain chemicals. I would be just a force of nature doing that, and it wouldn't.
Or beating up Sam Harris.
There's a joke about the hospital scene with the word beating here, but I like to think I'm above it at this point.
Right. Cutisek, you said that you started the podcast saying that you are Asuka's, you're a fan of Asuka as a character, which is interesting because a lot of people hate her. I don't. I know where you're coming from, but I was wondering if you could explain to the audience why you like Asuka so much, because she's a character who's hated a lot by a lot of people.
I don't really
She
like
identifies as Asuka.
I don't actually. I think it's a running joke by now in the other Discord servers, and I think I can identify with each character to some degree, because when I started watching Evangelion, I was back in high school. I was maybe 14 actually, and I was dealing with some stuff in my life. And every time I see Evangelion again, I can relate to a new character in a new way, because I keep reflecting on my old trauma, and I see them struggling with their current trauma, and I think it just kind of reconnects. And I think that currently Asuka is the closest character, because I just saw Evangelion this week for this podcast, and I think it changes. It's like a cycle.
I'm going to naturally assume when you call me stupid from now on that it's meant to be a term of endearment. That's all I can say, really.
No, it has to be idiot, right? Idiot Shinji, or at least in the dubbing, it's like idiot Shinji.
Baka.
Do you like it more every time you watch it, or do you like it less every time you watch it?
I would say I would like it less. I think that right now it's like I like coming back to the story because it helped me deal with the things in the past, and it showed me new ideas like Christianity, like Evangelion. Ironically, made me Christian, and
That's awesome.
it's like a dear memory I like to remind myself of.
Did you watch End of Evangelion back when you were in high school, or did you stop at the episode 25 and 26?
No. I actually watched everything, and I think the first movie of the Rebuild. I don't know what year it came out, but I think I even saw the Rebuilds back then. I don't know. Does anybody remember what time the first Rebuild movie came out?
Rebuild of Evangelion.
I think it came out a long time ago, right? Like
2007. Wow.
Oh yeah.
Wait, you were in high school in 2007?
No.
I was in high school.
You're an old bird, aren't you?
I was in high school. So Curious, like, did you watch Rebuild first, or did you watch? What's the order that you watched it? If you don't mind.
No, I actually went with the original series, End of Evangelion. I think I even saw the Death and Rebirth movies. That was like the predecessor to the End of Evangelion movies, which is basically still the same thing over and over again with some scenes that are deleted from the later releases, and it's basically the same thing. And then I started the Rebuilds.
All right. I still haven't watched Rebuild, and I'm not sure if I will, to be honest. I mean, I might, but
it's not. I think Rebuilds, like, they help expand the world, and I think that Hideaki actually forgot to include some things in the original story, and he wanted to repair the narrative maybe, and I think the fights are much cooler in the Rebuilds.
See, I mean, it might be just the fact that I am old, I will admit that, but I do find the original series, for me, it has that retro factor.
Definitely. I still prefer like the original series, but
it has a patina to it that modern anime does not.
Oh, certainly, and there's the fact you got to take into account as well. It's in that era where anime was still hand animated, which I think Pilgrim and I have previously talked about this when we talked about this idea that sort of modern anime, where digital art has become more at the forefront of the medium, it's kind of lost something to it.
It's the love and the effort, because like when you're doing by hand every single frame, like the amount of love that has to go into that story, right? For you to arduously make scene by scene, like every movement that every character makes, every time, Asuka looks at Shinji with disgust, every time Shinji cowers in the corner. Every single one of those moments is painstakingly done by somebody by hand who's just like really making it happen, right? And I think that and you feel that a little bit when it's digital. I guess it's prettier, it's certainly more colorful, but I think it's too quick. I think you don't feel the effort, I guess. I don't know. I mean, it could be purely psychological, right? But
it's surgical. That's the way I would describe it. It's very precise and very clean, but there's just something about it that isn't quite as pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
Besides Asuka, Curious, like, what do you think of Misato? Because Misato is a character that evokes a lot of from the male fans. She invokes a lot of
Misato is best girl.
well, considering our age, like she's the only one, right? She's like
I am just saying again that my vote is
the legal one.
Sorry.
She's the legal one, actually, for you.
Yeah. She's the legal waifu. Like you can't say anything.
Once again, Ritsuko gets ignored, and I am disappointed in all of you for this fact.
She's a cat lady. Forget again.
I'm just saying that a woman who would kill somebody over you is probably just like that's devotion right there.
Did she kill her?
It might not be the most healthy expression of devotion, but it is devotion.
Or in the spirit of Evangelion, is she just doing it for herself? She's just motivated by her own passions. She doesn't love.
I think that's the case.
Yeah, it's purely selfish.
Ritsuko's case.
I will take what I can get. Thank you very much.
especially in the way that she was actually trying to please her mother instead of like her own feelings.
Does she kill her mother?
No, the mother commits suicide.
Oh, yes,
Are we doing spoilers in this podcast? I'd like to assume that pretty much everyone.
I think all those cats are out of the bag. So yes, I believe we are doing spoilers.
Yeah, I think we can do it. Like, I think I'm pretty much the only. I was the only one in my friends group I was the only one in my friends group who never watched Evangelion. So I think people like me are.
I mean, when you think about it for a second, both Ritsuko and her mother fall for Gendo, which means, moral of the story, being a dick works.
But you don't say that, but it really does.
Yeah,
I'm not endorsing that.
No. Why would I promote that?
Like the public, I'm not attracted to Gendo in any way.
Sorry, we couldn't hear you. The connection broke for a second there, but we want to hear from you, especially from this topic. As a woman, do you feel attracted to Gendo? Like, does he do it for you? Would you kill somebody for Gendo?
No, I don't feel attracted to him. Like, in no way. I don't.
This woman just doesn't know what she's saying, obviously. Like, sorry, kids.
Explain my feelings.
So of all the male characters there, because like for the male fans, you always have like best girl and stuff like that. I've never heard best boy. Like, I've never heard like a female.
Because that's gay. Okay.
No, not from us. Not from us. I'm talking from. There are plenty of female anime fans, but you never hear like best boy. I never heard. Like, maybe because I don't spend that much time with female weebs. But is there like a best boy kind of thing?
Because there are none.
Well, what about that Kaji guy? He's like a cool dude.
He is a thought, though.
Yeah,
that's true.
So it's like the only logical option.
Yeah, because it's either him.
This is exactly my thoughts with Ritsuko. Just take what you can get at this point.
All these characters are really messed up, right? So I think like if there's any anime show that doesn't fit for you to have like a best boy or a best girl or a wife or anything, like, or a husband or whatever, Evangelion, like, nobody really. Who's going to be your wife, right? The girl that's going to abuse you all the time, the girl who doesn't have a soul, like Rei, or the girl who is alcoholic and has like a Freudian thing and is only going to date you if you remind her of her dad.
Bold of you to assume I'd ever admit to having a waifu on a podcast, really.
Of course, yes. None of us ever have waifus, yes.
Exactly, yeah, definitely.
But you do, though.
I couldn't possibly say. No, despite the jokes I make about Ritsuko, I have actually said for a long time, like from the first time I watched the show and decided I hated it, there is no best girl. Evangelion does not have a best girl.
Yeah, that's
honestly, no.
What you have is the best of a bad bunch. No,
yeah, exactly.
That's true.
That is what it is.
How do Evas? Designs of Evas.
Sorry?
Yeah, we can only assume that we can say that the only good thing about Evangelion, the Evas, so we can argue about the best Eva in the show.
Oh, that's a question right there. I'm going to go with Eva 1 just because purple is my favorite color.
Yeah, I'm going with 8.
I'm sorry, I am just going to be a basic bitch about it, but it is what it is.
You're talking about the Evas? Are you talking about the Evas?
Yeah.
Oh.
Unit 1 is the best one because it is purple. That's all I need to say on the matter, really.
Oh, okay. Well, what's your favorite Eva, Cul-de-sac? Red, right? The Unit 2? No, that's Unit 3.
Actually, Unit 8 from the Rebels. Because it's pink.
Oh, okay. Right.
Which brings us on to the important topic. I know that Pilgrim here hasn't seen the rebuilds, but as I was saying before to you, Cul-de-sac, Maria's best girl. It's canon. It happened at the end. You know it did.
I know. I know what I saw, but she's not the best girl. And I think just a moment ago, we all agreed there is no best girl in the show.
Okay, touche. But then again, like, are we including the rebuilds in the show here? Like, I'd say these are two different beasts.
I still don't like this part of canon.
See, you've got me way too involved in this conversation now, and I feel awful about
it. I know about Mara. She's the one who goes in that one robot who goes berserk, right? Is that her?
This is Evangelion. You're going to have to narrow that down a bit.
Oh, right, yeah, of course. Yeah, okay. So, like, there's a robot who's not an Eva, who is a complete robot, and there's another rider, there's another pilot who pilots that robot, right? I haven't watched it. And then that pilot goes berserk, right? That robot goes berserk. That's Mari, right? Who rides that robot?
It's been so long since I've seen the rebuilds that I wouldn't be able to tell you, to be honest. Cutisek, you're our expert.
Yeah,
Folks,
there's something like that in the rebuild.
I need to interrupt for a moment. I need to head on out. I need to go and sell guns like a stereotypical American.
A stereotypical Southern American.
Indeed, yes.
All right. Well, thank you for stopping by, Valerius. Thank you. And yeah, this is great.
Yep, I'll have to do it next time.
All right.
All right. Till next time, then.
Take care.
God bless. All right. You guys want to keep? Is that right? Sorry.
I've got time. If you've got time.
Yeah, I got time as well. What about you, Cutisek? You have time?
Cutisek is having problems with her microphone. She's just told me. Oh, she's put it in the main chat as well. Okay, so
yeah.
I'm going to assume she has time and she will speak when she's able.
Of course, yeah. I'll take this opportunity to get the beers downstairs. And
yes, she does have time. Yeah, by all means, get yourself some beers. Do I want another gin?
All right, be right back.
Yeah. Hey, it's working.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I had to change my mic. I don't know what's wrong. But
It's working perfectly. I can hear your lovely dulcet tones as we speak.
Yeah, I think the mic has been acting up the whole time because when I was trying to say something, it wasn't even showing up. I was talking, so thanks, Razer.
The whole mic thing just gonna. There's gonna be a bunch of people down in the comments going like, "You don't let the woman talk, you misogynist bastards!" Right?
That's generally true in my case. I don't know about you.
Well, in my case, it's technology. Technology is misogynistic.
I'm so glad that this is not linked to my personal accounts in any way for the amount of outrageous things I've said.
To be fair, I'm actually a very silent person, and I very rarely have something to say that's meaningful. So who cares anyway?
No, it's always meaningful.
Okay, Pilgrim, I have to ask because you are Brazilian. Are you drinking Skol?
Oh, Skol! No, I'm drinking a Munich German beer, Spaten.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, you're definitely from southern Brazil.
Channeling my inner Misato, drinking beer. How does she do it? She goes like, oh shit!
I don't think you will summon her in this way.
Speaking of the others, briefly as we were just before we all went to go and get, what's the word? Sufficiently lubricated, as it were. Have you ever seen the parallels before between the Evers and this idea of the Jewish golem?
I think I actually read about it once, but I think it doesn't really line up with the story. And it's like maybe like someone wanted to make the to expand the Kabbalah. Symbolic.
Because it's sort of the golem isn't something that really occurs to my knowledge. I mean, I'm not an expert on rabbinical Judaism, but it's not something that really occurs in scripture, as in sort of like the Torah, the Talmud, or anything like that. But there is this clear idea within Kabbalah of the golem as this thing. And I found it quite interesting that there's a lot of parallels between this story or this myth of the golem and the Evers, in that they are this almost like this thing which you create in order to protect yourself that you don't really have much in the way of control of.
No. I think like the story of Golem I know, which is of the Prague Golem, is that you would like insert a ball into his head, I think.
Yes,
and
that's right.
So
there's a few different versions to the story.
Yeah, definitely like little notes with the tasks he was supposed to do, and he would obey them. So I think that the Evas actually have more of a free will, we can say, than a golem.
I mean, I've heard a few conflicting things about the sort of the Prague Golem, and there's a few other stories in there as well. Again, I'm no expert, so somebody is probably going to rip me apart in the comments for being just this very presumptuous prick in a podcast. But no, there was this one story about a golem falling in love, and because his love wasn't returned, he went berserk and sort of attacked the community that he was created to protect. But I found it interesting in this idea of the golem. There's this story where it's made out of clay, and a Kabbalist or a rabbi is supposed to put a piece of paper in its mouth or in its head somewhere with like particular words from scripture, like life or something to that effect, to get it animated, as it were. And what we see in the Evers is the fact that they don't really activate until there is some sort of connection with a pilot, with the sort of the whole thing about the what are they called? The pod things that the pilots use. I can't remember.
Test plug.
The test plug. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that the pilot plug goes in, and as it goes, we are God's creation, and a very sort of like basic level theology here. And it is that insertion into the Ever which sort of activates it, as it were.
Yeah, I think like the similarities are there, but I don't think it was the original intention.
So
I think
it's funny you mentioned that. So, sorry, can after you.
I trailed off. I don't know what I was trying to say.
So yeah, I think it's interesting that you say that, because I think this leads back into the point I made earlier in the podcast where I said that I feel like the symbols in Evangelion are something that have more sway over you than what they're intended for.
Oh,
And
yeah,
God-
definitely.
yeah,
Well,
so
yeah,
I
there's a
just
whole
found it
audience,
interesting.
right? Like they're literally in the belly of their mothers who are robots. So I think that definitely checks out. It's just the symbolism is more important than the story itself. Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting because when I made the point earlier about the sort of the idea of human instrumentality being a religious ritual, I was wondering to myself, would it be uncharitable to say that Hideaki Anno has been like accidentally clever with this? And I was thinking to myself, no, it's got to be more than that, surely, at some point or another. But then it got to a point where I was realizing it and thinking to myself, there is some meaning to this, which I feel wasn't intended.
I definitely agree.
But it is definitely there.
I definitely agree. I mean, especially with the robots and the golem, like the connection is definitely there. But I think mostly he did it because, I think mecha anime giant robots existed before Evangelion. I don't think it was that much of a
True.
pioneer. But so I think if there's a connection, it's probably more of a coincidence. But everything else, like the way that the angels are depicted, there is, like I said before, there is legitimately some level of angelology in the show. Like it's, of course, angels aren't, robotic, techno, whatever monstrosities. But when you look at some of these depictions, they might as well be, right? They have like giant eyes and
well, definitely, there must be some form of angelic life out there that is a massive reflective tetrahedron. Otherwise,
yeah, exactly, shooting lasers and drilling into the center of the earth. But but I do think that to use symbology, he did study more than a lot of people give him credit for, and I do think that the symbolism goes a little deeper than you might assume, even if it's there just to look cool. I think it does end up communicating something that's more than what it is.
Definitely.
Yeah.
See, that's the question I've been asking myself all week. Sorry, Cusack. Sorry?
Yeah, I was just...
It's the mic. We'll just wait for a second.
I think I should be alright by now. There was some internet stuff going on again.
All right, I can hear you. Fantastic. You said that Evangelion helped make you Christian. Do you want to expand on that? That seems really interesting, because I imagine you as a 14-year-old watching it in high school and being interested in the symbolism. How did that happen?
How did it happen? Yeah. I think that like the first interest I got was in seeking Christianity, because I couldn't understand all the stuff that was going on in Evangelion. So I had to dig a little deeper, and actually the biggest, how can I say, the biggest push happened much later in my life, when I was talking about Evangelion with a family friend who was raised Christian, and he was fascinated by the show. And I was like, hey, it can't be that bad, obviously, if a guy like him likes the show. And I started digging deeper again into Christianity, because I live in the least religious state in Europe, so there's hardly any.
Wow.
Yeah, I think so. We are, I don't know, one of the least religious countries of the whole European Union. So the basic knowledge about religion is, I would say, non-existent, because in schools you don't really get anything about Christianity or anything else. And so it was like Evangelion helped me on the journey of educating myself.
That's fantastic. And I think that right there is yeah, the Czech Republic is one of the least religious states in Europe, which is ironic because it's right next to Poland, right? And Poland is the most religious, or one of the most religious states in Europe. But anyway, European politics aside, I think that alone makes Evangelion worth it, and I think makes me grateful for Evangelion, because I do know that a lot of the theological concepts are not very flattering, and like I said in the video, it's kind of like how Asian guys must feel when Western works are shitting all over their religious and spiritual heritage, right? Like Shaolin Showdown and stuff like that. Even Samurai Jack to some degree, right? Like where they take these very heavy symbolic things that mean a lot to a lot of cultures out there, and they market it as something fun to make toys and stuff like that, right? And Evangelion has a bit of that aspect to it. There is, they did sell a lot of toys, from what I remember, and so like you do have this, the Japanese are marketing using Christian theology as something marketable to make something, for entertainment and stuff like that. But at the same time, it still inserts Christianity or Christian symbols at least, into the cultural dialogue. And it gets us discussing theology, even if it's using it just for aesthetics to make it cool, to make it more unique than other anime around it. And I think for that, I am grateful for Evangelion, to at least inserting it back into the conversation, where you have cases where, like Cutisek, who found her religious heritage in a time where her country divorced itself willingly from that. She found it back through a Japanese cartoon who used it to be cool, right? But at least, but that altered her life in a very interesting way, and I think that's cool. I think that's pretty interesting.
Our Lord works in mysterious ways.
It really does. I think that the depiction of Christianity doesn't have to be perfect in the show, as long as it helps pique some interest in the people, that they try to educate themselves further, as I did.
Yeah, definitely.
See,
And as long as it's not heretic, actually, of course.
like Albigensianism, like what's it called? Attack on Titan. The kind of like Christian themes, it's mostly like Albigensianism, right? Like, oh, the world is hell, everything's horrible, we have to, But Evangelion is not like that. I think it's more. It's using. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Pilgrim. After you.
No, I was just about done. Like, it's a mix of Jewish mysticism and certain Christian theological concepts from all over, from many different denominations. Yeah, but go ahead.
So I was thinking to myself while watching it the other day that sort of the Christianity within Evangelion tends to be more symbolic, and the other things that come to the forefront more in terms of the way it thinks and the sort of the philosophy of the show, if you will, tends to be more down the mysticist and Kabbalist route. And sort of over the course of this conversation, if you want to find the real sort of the Christian meaning behind it, it's behind a little bit of a layer of subtext. It's not immediately noticeable, if you see what I mean.
I agree. I definitely agree. Just to prove your point, there is no real Jesus in the story, right? It's mostly Adam, Lilith, angels, God. It's very much.
Lilith is one of my gripes with the show, to be honest with you, because I've heard so many people tell me that Lilith was real and should have been in Old Testament scripture, because apparently Evangelion used the name Lilith, therefore Lilith was real. It's like, oh, come on now. Stop it.
Right. Well, I guess that makes us like Christian versions of the SJWs, right? You're using my culture in the wrong way, and now everyone thinks differently than what it should be because you're like appropriating my culture and making it to use anime toys and I don't know, like wife pillows or something like that, or waifu pillows. But Lilith, she like, where's she from? She's from like. She's in the Talmud, or like what? She's not in the Bible, right? So,
there is, if I remember it correctly, in Old Testament scripture, there is mention of a name Lilith, and it's generally referred to in sort of by rabbinical scholars it tends to be referred to as like night demon or something like that. It doesn't refer to a person. And the idea that Lilith was a person who existed in the garden before Eve is a very niche belief, even amongst Jewish mysticists. Again, this is going to be one of those things I'm probably going to be wrong about, and I'm going to be torn apart in the comments for. But that's what I remember reading on the subject, and I'm kind of sympathetic to the idea that things do on some level exist. I mean, I don't know if you follow the YouTuber Jonathan Pajot. He does this very interesting video on sort of the ideas of existence by, oddly enough, proving that Santa Claus is real.
I guess in a platonic way, right? I mean, that's
in some sense or another, Santa Claus is real. So in that same sort of vein, Lilith is something that doesn't not exist. But at the same time, was she the first woman in the garden? Absolutely not. And that's that little thing where I hear people talk about it. It just makes me raise an eyebrow a bit.
You mean in a platonic way, right? Like the ideas, the forms, they exist in themselves.
Generally speaking, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I'd say that's probably quite a sort of a succinct way to put it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. To be honest, like when I was a kid in high school, I heard about Evangelion back then because my friends were all into it. I think it makes sense now with the rebuild. I think that's why it was a really big thing back in the day. And, 2007, I was entering high school. And so it makes sense now why everyone was talking about it at the time. And it just seemed very weird and bizarre to me, like they would say stuff like, oh, the robots are their parents. And I'm like, what? And they'd be like, oh, they go into this tunnel and they see this thing nailed to a cross. And I'm like, this sounds like blasphemy, blasphemer, Japanese blasphemy. But people really love this show. And I think it can't be, there's no simple, you can't write it off. Like people have a lot of good gripes. There's this YouTuber, I forgot his name. I'll leave his name. I'll leave his name in the description, but he makes this fantastic video on why Evangelion sucks. I'm not sure if you guys saw that one. Like he just rips into the ending, he rips into everything, he rips into Asuka. And I don't agree with a lot of what he says, but I respect it because for one, he's very funny, and secondly, I understand why he doesn't like it and why he sees everything the way he sees it, but at the same time, you can't just write it off as pretentious or stupid or everything is done just to be cool and different and whatever and risque. I do think that...
Yeah, I'd say that's the conclusion that I've reached on sort of watching it again for sort of preparing for this podcast. Like, you can't just write it off.
Yeah.
I think Evangelion is mostly hurt by its online reputation. Exactly like the things you mentioned, the robots are the parents and stuff like that, and the hospital scene and all of that stuff. I even think that the reputation Evangelion has online is mostly off-putting people from actually trying to understand it fully or to some extent, and not like thinking about it on some superficial layer. It's like a stupid anime about robots and parents and mommy issues and stuff like that.
Right, and like weird waifus and stuff. Yeah. No, I definitely agree. Especially our friend from the Discord server, like she doesn't want to watch it, right? And like, good luck for us trying to tell her to watch it. Like she heard about the hospital scene. She heard about how it ends. It's like that was my case. Like I didn't want to watch it precisely because of the hospital scene, and I knew how it ended. And I'm like, okay, like why am I going to watch something about like this? This doesn't seem to be worth my time. But I guess realizing the difference between tragedy and nihilism, that there's a difference between the two. And if I make a video just after the podcast about Evangelion, it's probably going to be differentiating between tragedy and nihilism, probably. And I think tragedy, there's already a ton of stories, right, about heroes that rise to the occasion, heroes that face their flaws and do magnificent things despite their weaknesses. There's tons of stories like that. Sometimes a very good tragedy is important. Like us seeing the absolute hell that we can bring if we make the wrong decisions is important. And it can be meaningful. And especially when you recognize your own flaws, in the main character whose flaws bring about the terrible fate. Because that's the Greek tragedy thing, right? In Greek tragedy, it's always like some quintessential flaw within the main character, right? That brings about a horrific fate. It's similar in Shakespeare, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a long time since I read Shakespeare, but it's similar as well. Like in Hamlet, for instance, none of those characters are functional. Everyone in Hamlet is deeply dysfunctional, and that's why the ending of the story is quite tragic. And it's the same thing in Evangelion. But just because the characters are flawed and they can't get out of their flaws and they're crushed by their own evil, it doesn't have to be nihilistic, because it's not saying that that's all there is. It's not saying, see, you will never get out of your flaws. You're never going to be anything but a little loser that masturbates in a hospital, right? Like, it's not saying that to you. What it's really saying is, this is what you're going to become if you don't snap out of it, or if you don't try to make the right decisions. At least that's my opinion, and I think what proves my point is the original ending in F-25 and 26. Even though it was weird, like I said, artsy college film type thing, it still had a happy ending, and it still was about the characters facing their flaws and overcoming them, but also understanding that they're flawed, but understanding that they're not defined by their flaws, and they can be more than their flaws, and they receive congratulations at the end, right, and stuff like that. It was very, very positive in that regard, and I think that proves to me that there is hope in the message of Evangelion, even if he chose to end the narrative in End of Evangelion in a tragic way. It's not saying that the tragedy is all that exists. It's saying that the tragedy is one option that we have to be careful of, and that itself can be meaningful. What do you guys think?
I think that there was some that actually like reflects the feeling that was in Japanese population back in the 90s, and there are some theories that actually reflect the pop culture with the real world, and actually Evangelion is a prime example of the fiction of the end of the world that was like in the 90s, and I lost my... I'm sorry.
You mean sort of like the Kobe earthquakes?
No, actually, yeah, the earthquakes were that, but in 95 the Shinryo happened as well, right? The sarin attacks in Tokyo.
What was it? Shinrikyo?
Yeah,
the cult attacks, the blue cult that kill people on the train.
Yeah,
Yes,
that was like in March of 95, and so the 1995 is like the starting point of this trend in pop culture, like the fiction of the end of the world that lasted briefly to the 2000s, and when the feeling in society changed, that was again reflected in the pop culture. So after the fiction of the end of the world, we got the survival fictions, the battle royale things, and when 2010 hit, like the pop culture actually started orienting on the slice of life anime and like mild topics and themes in anime.
I think it's interesting you say that, actually, because I feel
I'm trying to remember the guy that actually wrote a study about this, and I think it was Tanaka, like 3 main streams in the pop culture. I'll try looking it up.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that, actually, because I feel like it's a very easily forgotten the fact that anime and manga tends to be in Japan a lot of the time at this social commentary. So that I remember once I went to a talk on the anime and manga of Akira. And what I didn't realize is when the anime was first sort of published, a lot of the events in the story were very sort of how do I describe it? They were sort of very current events. Like a lot of things that happened in Akira, like motorcycle gangs, were very evocative of their time. That was sort of like the heyday of the Bosozoku in Japan. You had the military coup subplot, which was supposed to be evocative of Yukio Mishima's famous failed military coup, and so on and so forth. So no, I think it's interesting you raised that about Evangelion, and then subsequently in the 2010s, where you had this explosion of slice of life. How anime in Japan seems to be more of a social commentary than just a form of entertainment.
As art usually is, right? Like, let's be like all the inner academic. Yes, all art is commentary, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, and any pop culture actually reflects the real world, not only in Japan, but worldwide.
It's no explain why we have so much isekai nowadays.
It was a slice of life happened after Evangelion, right?
Yes, so it was sort of mid 2000s, 2010s. There was just sort of it was very much the sort of the trend which the sort of the medium had at the time.
So is this because there's a slice of life moment in the original ending of the episode 25 and 26, right? There is a slice of life moment, right? And that Shinji has a dream, right? Is that what started slice of life? Is Evangelion so influential that it even influenced like the next genre that came out after itself? Like that one moment.
Don't say that. Question. No, definitely not. In the 90s, we actually had the bubble burst, like the crisis actually, and it's called the decade, right, in Japan. So I think slice of life came later because Japan started being like productive again. They got out of the crisis decade and finally started prospecting again.
Prospering. Oh, right. Prospecting is like miners, right? I think.
Yeah. Sorry.
Prospering, of course. I mansplain right now.
Oh, fantastic! It's not just me getting in trouble for this podcast.
Well, this is the funny thing. Like we all have very distinct accents. Like we should call this like the accent podcast, right? Like 4 accents. Like good luck for the listener to try to figure what everyone is saying. You have the British, you have the Eastern European, you have the Brazilian Latino guy, you have the Southern American. Of course, the one American we have in the podcast is from the South, of course, right? It's gonna confuse everybody with all the different.
The next time you have me on this podcast, I'm just going to put on the most North FC accent I can, just to sort of really mix it up a bit.
All right, I think we can wrap things up. Actually, I think we can just reach a conclusion, and then we can all go our separate ways until next time. Yeah.
The conclusion we came to hit your children early on, and you will be fine.
Right, yeah, that's the
I
conclusion.
remember correctly.
Exactly. If you have a son, beat the crap out of him before he ends the world by masturbating.
Yeah.
The weirdest thing is, that makes perfect sense in the context of Evangelion.
And it makes perfect sense in the context of the Zoomers and like where we're living right now. Like where everything is because right now what we have is we have a crisis.
Switch out a couple of words from Evangelion for real world terms. It's like beat your son before he gets an OnlyFans account. It still makes perfect sense.
Right. Before he discovers the internet. Yeah, see, this is the thing. I think the reason, in conclusion, right? I think one of the reasons why Evangelion was so influential is because it perfectly captured the zeitgeist of what it was like to be a young man in the 90s. And that reality still happens to this day. I think it's going to end in this decade. I think this because the 90s was, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was really the peak of the current West, right? The prosperity was rising all over the world. Every country was getting richer. Everyone was getting more prosperous, and as a result, you did have this spiritual emptiness because everything was focused on consumerism, right? And superficial consumption of pop culture and stuff like that. Which apparently it's a big theme in Evangelion that you shouldn't just be caught in escapism. You have to be more in the real world, which is why you have footage of the theater, of real people in the theater, right? And end of Evangelion and stuff like that. It's talking about not being too caught up in escapism, according to certain video essayists on YouTube that I've heard. So that's interesting because apparently Hideki Anno was becoming disillusioned with otaku culture. So it's a criticism of the otaku. Shinji being like the nerdy kid, but this nerdiness, this otaku-ness in his character is actually a very bad thing, which leads to tragedy. But I think this reality of young men is not going to exist, I think, the next decade. I think we're shifting into a new era. Things are getting more difficult with the war in Ukraine and economic downturn and stuff like that. I think our kids, certainly if we have kids, are going to actually have a different reality altogether. But I think Shinji does represent what it was like growing up from the 90s all the way up to 2015, I think, where you're in this prosperous culture. Everything is superficial. The relationships they have with people are superficial. Everyone is driven by this selfishness, right? People don't really know what to do with each other because there's a sense of purpose, and that has been lost. And I think that's the main reason why Evangelion was so influential, because we could all identify with these characters, and it expressed the reality that we were all going through in a very real way, and it was showing the dark side of that in a very visceral way as well. Yeah, that's my conclusion.
I'd say that's quite succinct. That's a fair conclusion. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice conclusion.
Thanks. You guys want to add to that, or before we end it? So
No, I just want to say, watch Evangelion if you haven't.
All right. After we spoil
I'm not
everything.
going to say anything because I feel like anything would be an anticlimax after that. So I'm just going to leave it there.
All right. Well, thanks for stopping by, guys. I appreciate
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for having me.
it. All right. It's a pleasure. Till next time.